Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going on an epic journey. We're looking at the absolute survival of the word, from mud tablets to modern tech. We're talking about the incredible evolution of ancient books and manuscripts. We'll start with the very first writing, literally etched into damp earth, move to fragile plant fibers stashed in desert caves, and go all the way to 21st century particle accelerators reading texts that were literally destroyed by volcanoes. It's a story of pure human ingenuity, a whole lot of incredible luck, and just relentless curiosity.
But first, I want you to consider something. If our civilization completely collapsed tomorrow, how much of our knowledge would actually survive? It's kind of a sobering thought, isn't it? I mean, our digital world is massive, but it is fundamentally fragile. So to really understand our own fragile legacy, we need to travel back to the dawn of the book. We need to see exactly how ancient civilizations fought to preserve their voices for future generations. Remember, they didn't have cloud servers. They just had the earth, plants, and animal skins.
Just look at the sheer scale of deep time we're dealing with here in the Middle Bronze Age. Around 2000 to 1800 BC, we see the very first organized attempts to actually document human literature emerging across Mesopotamia and Egypt. And we're not just talking about boring tax receipts anymore. We're seeing profound, complex myths like the Sumerian lament for Ur or the Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh. These civilizations realized that to make their culture last, they absolutely had to write it down.
Which brings us to part 1, the era of mud and fire.
Long before paper was even a concept, we had cuneiform. Now this was a wedge-shaped script where scribes would take a triangular reed, a calamus, and painstakingly press characters into moist clay tablets. It was a totally brilliant use of abundant local resources. They'd record legal contracts, epic myths, administrative data, all on this wet mud. Then, they'd leave it in the sun or dry it by the fire to harden it. Sure, it was heavy, and yeah, it was super bulky, but man, it was durable.
And what's truly staggering is just the sheer volume of knowledge they pulled together using such a difficult medium. Get this, over 30,000 clay tablets were amassed in the 7th century BCE. This was at the world's oldest systematically organized archive, the magnificent library of Ashurbanipal in ancient Nineveh. King Ashurbanipal wasn't just some conqueror, he was actually a trained scribe, and he wanted to gather all the knowledge of the past 2,000 years under one single roof.
We actually know his exact intentions because he told us. Ashurbanipal purposely sent agents all across his empire to collect divination texts, medical remedies, and literature. He had them meticulously copied and, in his own words, deposited within my palace for perusing and reading. He wanted to preserve his culture, as he put it, for the sake of distant days. Basically, he wanted to guarantee that his civilization's voice would never, ever be silenced.
But, history has a pretty dark sense of humor. The ultimate irony here is that in 612 BCE, Nineveh was absolutely sacked. It was burned to the ground by a coalition of enemies wanting to wipe Assyria right off the map. But when those blazing fires brought the palace walls crashing down, they inadvertently baked the clay tablets hidden in the rubble. So the enemy's fire didn't actually destroy the library, it fired the clay like a giant kiln. It perfectly preserved Ashurbanipal's massive library for over 2 millennia, right up until archaeologists finally dug them out of the dirt in the 1850s.
All right, moving on to part 2, the age of the scroll.
So while clay was undeniably durable, it was wildly cumbersome. You really can't carry a library of clay tablets in a backpack, right? Enter the papyrus scroll. This offered a lightweight, continuous writing surface. Scribes would extract the marrow from papyrus reeds in Egypt, press them, dry them, and glue the sheets together. And amazingly, some of these things could reach 40 meters long. But it definitely had its limitations. Because it rolled horizontally on wooden axes, you had to use both hands just to hold and read it. And you had to consume the text sequentially. There was no skipping ahead to chapter 4.
Now, the fact that this fragile papyrus format survived at all is basically a miracle of pure isolation. In 1947, Bedouin shepherds made what's arguably the discovery of the century. They stumbled upon nearly 900 extremely fragile Jewish manuscripts written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. We know them as the Dead Sea Scrolls. So how did plant fibers survive for 2,000 years? Purely by isolation. They were stashed in these deep, dark caves near Kerbet, Qumran, sealed up tightly in stone jars, perfectly protected from moisture and light.
Conversely, there's another incredible cache of over 1,800 scrolls from the Roman villa of the papyri. But these didn't survive through careful isolation. They survived through sudden, catastrophic disaster.
When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD, the intense, oxygen-deprived heat of the pyroclastic flow slammed into the library. But instead of turning everything to ash, the scrolls were flash carbonized into these compact little blocks and then instantly buried under cement-like volcanic rock. Astonishingly, it remains the only surviving library from classical antiquity that exists in its entirety.
Which leads us perfectly into Part 3, Reading the Unreadable. Okay, so here is the massive historical bottleneck. How on earth do you read a scroll that is effectively a piece of charcoal? For centuries, people tried physically unrolling the Herculaneum papyri. They'd slice them with knives, which, as you can probably guess, literally destroyed the priceless information inside. And to make matters even worse, the Romans used carbon-based ink. So even if you miraculously opened one, you're looking at black carbon ink on black carbonized papyrus. It is completely invisible to the naked eye. Scientists were facing what looked like an impossible task.
And this is exactly where modern technology steps in to save the day. By using volumetric phase contrast CT scanning, which, by the way, often involves massive particle accelerators, scientists can literally look inside the scroll without ever touching it. They figured out that the carbon ink sits just a tiny fraction of a millimeter raised on the papyrus. The scan actually detects that microscopic difference in thickness. From there, computers segment the scroll into tiny 3D pixels called voxels, trace the layers, and digitally flatten the whole thing into a 2D image. Right now, as we speak, they are reading ancient Greek philosophy without ever physically unrolling the scroll. It's completely mind-blowing.
Finally, we reach Part 4, the Codex Revolution. When you compare the old scroll tech with the new parchment codex, it becomes immediately clear why this format was so revolutionary. And by the way, codex is just the historical word for the book shape we still use today. The scroll was strictly sequential. You had to unwind the whole thing. But the codex? It bound pages at the back. This meant you had direct, immediate access to any specific point. You could finally have tables of contents. It separated words, added punctuation, and allowed for silent reading. But maybe most importantly, it rested completely flat on a table, finally freeing up your hands so you could take notes.
The codex format was an absolute game changer, mostly because of the power of consolidation. Before this, if you had a long work, like a big history text, it was broken up into multiple scrolls and stored in separate boxes. It was super fragmented. But the codex permitted immense, complex text to be physically bound together under one single cover. For example, it allowed for the unified transmission of Aristotle's Organon, which is this massive collection of logical treatises. It literally gave birth to the modern concept of the comprehensive book as one unified object of study.
So we've seen how human knowledge managed to survive on baked mud, hidden plants, carbonized scrolls, and bound parchment. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. Which formats of our current knowledge will actually manage to survive the next 2,000 years? I mean, as we sit here marveling at ancient ingenuity, sheer luck, and modern X-rays, it really leaves you wondering, will our delicate digital hard drives and cloud servers prove even half as resilient as the ashes of Mount Vesuvius or the fires of Nineveh? What exactly is our clay tablet that will speak to humanity thousands of years from now? Keep that in mind the next time you hit save. Thanks for joining me on this explainer and keep learning.